In fact, the way I would lose weight on campaigns is if I just said to myself, you can't eat chicken wings, you would lose weight. Not from not eating chicken wings, because there wasn't any other food. So I was like, well, I can't make that meal or that meal. And eventually you would just shrivel. And I was like, oh, I am 6 weeks out of college. I have already been fired from my first job. What am I going to do? Well, the movie Legally Blonde was out, and I watched that movie and I thought to myself, you know, if I had a degree from Harvard Law School, they wouldn't have fired me.
There you go.
Judges are a lagging indicator of our politics, right? They're appointed by a president, but that could have been 20 years ago. So if anything, there's sort of this, light from another planet. We're seeing it now, but the light actually started a long time ago. So you almost have to look back at what the political parties thought at the time.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today we are here with Sarah Isgur of The Dispatch. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, you've got a lot of cool titles and I don't want to mess it all up. So could you please fill in the audience real quick about what you're working on?
It's too many titles. So I'm a legal analyst with ABC News, and I'm the editor of SCOTUSblog. And I host the Advisory Opinions podcast with David French. And I have a book coming out called Last Branch Standing about the Supreme Court.
There we go. A lot to cover there. Let's start with the book. Give us a little bit of background there.
Yeah, so we've had this legal podcast for 6 years now, and David French and I really started it totally randomly when the Dispatch itself started back in 2019. And we were like, yeah, we're both lawyers, so we'll just like talk about law stuff. And it's just been this absolute labor of love. Cool. It's the highlight of both of our weeks. We do 2 episodes a week. We spend so many hours preparing. So for instance, the episode that is airing this week will be a deep dive before the slaughter argument is argued at the Supreme Court, which is on those quasi-independent agencies, the Federal Trade Commission, for example. Can Congress actually put limitations on the president's ability to fire someone at the Federal Trade Commission? And so, we spend like an hour running through all the precedents, all the philosophical arguments, the unitary executive, how Congress has given away all of its power over the years. And what you end up finding is that the story's a little more complicated than just Congress sucks. And don't get me wrong, Congress sucks now. Yes. But originally, they actually were trying to maintain their power. This was like a progressive era, not to be confused with political progressives today. But the progressive era was all about perfecting government, right? Government was too messy. There was compromises. Politics was yucky. And so they were like, what if we just bring in experts who are protected from all of this? And we're going to give a lot of power to the executive branch. We're going to have 2 strings attached. One, the president can't actually fire these people, and they have to be from the opposing political party. So it's not like we're handing the president a whole bunch of broad and vague powers that he can fill with his political cronies. Never. And 2, we'll have a single House veto. So the president can veto our legislation, but we can veto his regulations if the House of Representatives, for instance, a bare majority doesn't like it. That actually has a lot of strings attached when you think about it. But over the course of the last 100 years, the Supreme Court has basically nixed both of those strings such that now they didn't actually invalidate any of the laws that Congress passed. They just took a little scalpel and took out all of Congress's remaining power so that now the executive just has huge, broad powers, and we're basically living under government by executive order.
Okay. And I'm assuming that's what the book gets into there. This was the initial inspiration, and then you guys just went down an even further rabbit hole from there.
So the book is sort of an introduction to the Supreme Court. I've got, which justices are binge watching which shows, who takes credit for that, some fun insider stuff. But it's also just an overview of how the Supreme Court works, why it matters. And I've sort of compared this to, we've had a lot of books about government, but specifically the Supreme Court that have sort of been the Game of Thrones, House of Cards versions. Yeah, for sure. And this is more the Ted Lasso version. It's a bunch of people trying their best. Cool. You may not always agree with them. They may not always be right, but let's give people, like they're people. They think they're the good guys in their own story. So
Yeah.
try to understand them on their own terms.
We like that. I feel like Connect is the less serious version of like the news organizations that cover Congress. You know, we're focused on the fun parts of it.
The
you know?
people.
Yeah, exactly. So we're the Ted Lasso of Congress. I
Yeah.
like that. Any fun little tidbits from the book you'd like to share early? It's okay if not.
Oh gosh. I mean, my favorite part probably that I learned was I initially found out that Amy Coney Barrett was watching Slow Horses.
Okay.
And then I found out that, in fact, Justice Kagan had read the book that
yeah.
Slow Horses was based on. And so there was this almost like rivalry of like who discovered Slow Horses first.
Man. There you go. A great way for them to work together
Exactly.
and, you know, find common ground.
Well, you know, they have about 65 lunches a year that no clerks are allowed in, no U.S. Marshals. It's just the 9 of them. And when you think about that, I mean, that's a lot. Justice Barrett has referred to it as an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
You know, you don't get to pick your coworkers, but you're going to spend a whole lot of time with them. And so they're not going to talk about work. That's a rule that has been in place since
Nice.
Chief
That's
Justice
great.
John Marshall. So they got to find stuff to talk about. Their kids' majors at college, what they're binge watching, the latest sports games.
That's really cool.
And so you end up finding that they have a lot of collegiality, I think, more so than in the other branches where there's not that forced personal side.
Yeah, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but from like the law perspective, I feel like a lot of times you learn to disassociate what you're arguing from like the back and forth with the person. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. It's one of the really fun parts about the law, as that disagreement can actually be a fun thing and not an emotional thing. But I also think that, and this is going to sound kind of radical, but transparency has been overdone. And part of what really hurt Congress is having too much transparency. You know, if someone's watching every single one of your conversations, it's going to be really hard to compromise, but it's also going to be really hard to humanize because people will say that's frivolous or you're being too nice to the enemy. And that actually you need closed door, no staff in there, people just hanging out and getting to know each other, which is what the court has done.
I kind of see that from the opposite perspective, where I think a lot of times because everything is on C-SPAN, that shows are put on for clips on social media later instead of actually getting to the bottom of an issue.
I mean, there's plenty of scholarship out there that C-SPAN, which made a lot of sense on the front end, actually destroyed Congress, that you don't have real debates anymore on the floor because people aren't communicating with each other.
Yeah,
They're
for
communicating
sure.
for the camera, for small dollar donors, for clips, for sound bites, and that it's no longer a legislative process. It's like 535 Instagram influencers.
Amen. All right. I'm excited where this conversation's going to go. I like the start. What got you interested in law to start? I mean, you obviously have an obsessive knowledge here, but where did it come from?
So I actually went to college as a math major, and it was their first time using an online registration system. And of course, the system did not work. And so I ended up getting put in a senior level political science class in the fall of 2000. So it's Bush v. Gore, but we don't know that it's going to be Bush v. Gore. And so I looked around. I was the only freshman in the class, and I was like, you know, I think I've been thinking about college all wrong. I was thinking I needed to like pick a career and sort of have a life plan. But these people seem to speak a different language than I know how to speak. Like, I didn't know what the New York Times was aside from the paper for New York City, just like we had the Houston Chronicle. They were like doing the crossword puzzle, and they knew who op-ed columnists were. I knew what none of those words meant. And so I thought, you know, maybe I should think of this as 4 years to learn the language that they're speaking. I went on my first campaign in 2002. It was John Cornyn's first run at the Senate. And I cannot tell you the lifelong friends I made on that campaign. I sat next to Chip Roy, who was just starting law school at that point. I was still an undergrad baby. And, you know, one of my friends from that campaign I introduced to a sorority sister. They're married and live nearby me now. Another friend lives in Austin and works for Governor Abbott still, and I talk to him on a near daily basis. It was really a life-changing experience in every way, in like the fun of a campaign and how intense and addictive campaigns can really be.
Imagine.
But also just the personal side of getting to know other people who were weirdo nerds like you.
Yeah, and that's the thing about DC or politics in general is they go on to do cool things, right?
It's what blows my mind when people are jerks in DC. I'm like, this is
You
a
don't get
repeat
it.
player
Yeah.
town. You don't get it. Or it's the ultimate insult. If someone's a jerk to you, it's because they think you're not going to be a
Yeah.
repeat player. So it's even
Oh.
more of an insult than they probably intend it to be. Because there are very few people that I haven't run into again at some point.
I can imagine. So tell me a little bit more about how you found campaigns to be like addictive.
Oh my gosh. I mean, campaigns are truly my drug of choice. As I said, I did the Cornyn campaign in 2002. I did Romney in 2008, Romney in 2012, Ted Cruz at one point. I ran Carly Fiorina's campaign in 2016. I am like an anaconda. Like you sort of have your off time of being unemployed, and you sort of eat your meals, see your friends, live a life of sorts in unemployed stress and misery and sort of disgustingness. And then you go on the trail, and it's like the exhilaration of starvation for the anaconda. It's 18 months of constantness, and it's being on the road, it's seeing new parts of the country. But I think one of the best parts, and why I recommend anyone who's not quite sure what they want to be when they grow up, just like go on a campaign, because you will find yourself. It's why there's so many books about campaign life in some ways. But there's more work to be done than there are people to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you can go find where you can add value.
Yeah.
And you can do that at all the times of the day. Like you get your dumb work done that maybe you don't enjoy. Now you can go do something else that maybe they didn't know they even needed done. So it's a lot of meritocracy. And I liked that it's not, at least it wasn't at the time, this was not an elite space. Like a lot of people who worked in campaigns.
You don't think so? Like I would assume from the outside, right? Especially in like that era of politics, you would think of it as kind of that like more elitist type of political space.
No, I mean, this is like a lot of people who didn't go to college. There's a lot of, everyone smoked. Everyone ate chicken wings all the time. In fact, the way I would lose weight on campaigns is if I just said to myself, you can't eat chicken wings, you would lose weight. Not from not eating chicken wings, because there wasn't any other food. So I was like, well, I can't make that meal or that meal. And eventually you would just shrivel. But no, and people came from every place in life. Like they had failed at this thing they were trying, so they joined the campaign. Or their dad was a donor, so they joined the campaign. Like it's everything in between, and you're all thrown into this very mission-oriented sprint. Because the other thing that's versus like a real job, there's an end to this job. And so you are sprinting to this end, and you just need to push through a few more weeks, a few more days. Yeah. You've got that thing on the wall that says, how many days you have left, and you pull off a number each day, and those numbers tick down. Yeah. And it's so motivating.
For sure. I think that's what I've always been frustrated by in adult life is growing up in sports. You have this end goal, right? You always understand what the finish line is and what success is defined as. And in a startup, it's like, who freaking knows what the end goal is here? And you have your ideas, but it never goes that way. And so I'm always like, I wish I was still in sports because I can like point my head towards something and go.
That's what campaigns are. They're adult sports. And another piece of that I think you touch on is if you hate the guy next to you, like you guys just don't get along. In real life, that's going to grate on you because it's forever. Like who knows how long he's going to be there. You're going to be there. In sports or in campaigns with an end time and a metric of success, you're all headed towards the same spot. So who cares if you don't like him for now? You've only got 30 days left. Just push forward because you're actually on the same team, literally.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Maybe I got to go join a campaign.
They're so much fun.
Nope. That was early 20s, David. David missed that, so we're on from there.
It's never too late.
Do you have any specific campaign memories that you really hold on to? Like, that was it.
I remember sitting in Tampa in 2012 in a hotel room that was between a Chick-fil-A and a strip club. Very Tampa. And, there were low budgetary dollar amounts on what type of hotel you were allowed to stay at. This room that I got, because I had stayed at so many not great hotels, I had like whatever points, but at, the Motel 6.
Balling.
Yeah. The bathtub was like next to the bed on carpet. And I just remember reading All the King's Men.
Okay.
You know, a book about sort of corrupt Louisiana politics at the turn of the 20th century. And thinking like, where have I ended up in life?
So since I've never been on a campaign, my understanding of a campaign comes from Hollywood, right? And so stuff like West Wing in the last season, or, you know, even The Campaign.
Yeah.
Just very comical, but probably just as true.
Oh, I think The Campaign is one of the best campaign movies ever.
It's like The Veep, or
oh,
Veep,
yeah.
right?
Zach Galifianakis, if you haven't seen this, it's very, very funny. And there's a lot of truthiness in there, at least.
Because, all right, as a parent and as a husband, I feel like Hollywood has created this idea of what parenthood or marriage looks like. And it's almost always wrong, in my opinion. So you feel like it captured it well for politics or campaigns?
You know, they always say there's like Veep, House of Cards, and The West Wing. Each one has some piece of the truth, but probably the most realistic is Veep.
Yeah, for sure.
I actually remember this one time that Carly Fiorina's shoes were squeaking. And I was like, there is literally a Veep episode about this.
Yep.
I'm going to get blamed for her squeaky shoes. She did not blame me.
Good boss.
But, you know, I grew up on The West Wing. I get that it is the idealized version, but that's okay. Because it really did capture a moment in time when politics we were hoping that it was the idealized version.
Yeah.
I think what's sad now is that we don't even seem to think that's possible or want it to be possible. And so we've lived, you know, I mentioned this sort of at the beginning, we've lived in this era sort of post-Sopranos where our entertainment has been the bad guys, the rooting for the bad guys or trying to understand the bad guys, or it turns out everyone's a bad guy. And that's been true in our politics as well. And I think it's been really corrosive and corrupting. But there's like this light at the end of the tunnel where I feel like suddenly, you know, like even think back to Batman, right? We have dark Batman.
Yeah.
You know, our heroes
Dark Brandon,
even have to be sort of the worst version of themselves. But Ted Lasso, I think, opened up this new door where what if everyone's the good guy? What if the conflict comes from imperfect people trying to do the right thing and struggling with that? And my hope is that we will see more entertainment like that we as a society will be more attracted to those characters, and that will reflect in how we treat each other. And downstream of all of that is our politics.
Yeah, I love that. I think something I've learned over my time on the Hill is before you get to Congress and you're back in, I'm from Pittsburgh, so looking at it from a distance, you have this idea that everyone is nefarious, or they're out to get you, or the other side is just planning on how to ruin the country. And you get here and you realize people believe different things. Everyone is trying to work their hardest, and I'm sure there are some people out there that are trying to do this in a bad way. But for the most part, people are doing their best to work for what they believe is the best future. And I think if people can understand that more, we'd probably have a more civil political environment.
Almost everyone, I mean, except for extreme sociopaths, like serial killer level people, believe they are the good guy in their own story. So again, whether or not you think they're the good guy or their motivations are good, if they think they're the good guy in their own story, there is something there to hold on to, which is what is motivating them? How do they see this differently than I do? You know, Justice Kavanaugh, something else that's in the book, his favorite book is To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay. And he says, I mean, it's so cliche, right? But he literally has his 8th grade copy in his like personal office with his own little notes in it and scribbled in his little teenage handwriting, says, stand in someone else's shoes. And I know that sounds so silly, and we're all like, yeah, I learned that in 8th grade too. But boy, we don't seem to practice it much. Yeah. We seem to have forgotten it, because it's not just standing in someone else's shoes to understand their perspective. We should definitely do that. It's standing in their shoes to see what they think of you. Yeah. How do they think your behavior is? And like maybe they think you're the bad guy. It's standing in someone else's shoes that they can buy into the process even when they lose, whether it's a campaign or a court case or anything else. So I think it's actually a pretty profound concept that we brush off as being childlike.
Yeah, I mean, if we all practice empathy, or at least sympathy more,
Grace?
we'd be, grace. That'd be awesome.
Where's that these days?
Yeah, I don't see that in American politics. Would love to see it.
If you're married, you have to have grace.
Yeah, and that's what I hate when people are like, never compromise. It's like, you're going to have a hard marriage. Like, you realize there is no room to win 100% of the time when you're married. So, like, figure it out in politics, too.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in my marriage, compromise, obviously. But there's also something to be said for, like, I don't like that you did that. I'm mad about it. What am I going to do about that? Actually, I'm just going to let it go because you didn't mean to hurt me.
Yeah.
It wasn't your intention. And so why would I punish you for that or hurt you back for that? And so instead, it's like, we just move forward.
Why should politics be any different, right?
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. This is great. I like this conversation. So how did you get onto the SCOTUS route? Where did it start? Obviously, you go to law school, but...
Well, so I went to the Hill after college, and I was a press secretary on the House side for about 6 weeks, and then I was fired.
Oh, man.
The why I was fired is a point of some debate in my own head. So let me set the stage for you. Obviously, I'm the most junior person in terms of tenure coming into the office, and they said the most junior person is in charge of making the coffee. And I was like, yeah, here's the thing though. I don't drink coffee. In fact, I have like a sensitivity to caffeine, so like I don't know how to make coffee. Why should I make coffee for everyone that I don't drink? Also, this feels like you're making the girl make coffee. It did not start things out on the best foot. So there's like, was I fired for standing up for feminism, or was I fired for being an obnoxious asshole? I'll leave that to viewers. But I was fired, and I was like, oh, I am 6 weeks out of college. I have already been fired from my first job. What am I gonna do? Well, the movie Legally Blonde was out, and I watched that movie and I thought to myself, you know, if I had a degree from Harvard Law School, they wouldn't have fired me.
There you go.
That's about as complicated as my thinking got at that point as to whether or what to do next. And I will say, by the way, that thinking is so dumb on so many levels. First of all, yeah, okay, they wouldn't have fired me if I'd gone to Harvard Law School. I wouldn't have had that job if I had graduated from Harvard Law School at that point. Like, why would you be, you know, a press secretary on the Hill? So I went to law school having no intention of being a lawyer, but just feeling like Elle Woods. I would get my nails done. I wore a red ribbon in my hair, and let's see how this goes.
It's amazing how the like early 20s mind works.
I mean, I look back on it, it's baffling.
Yeah, and
it's
you
like
cringe.
A different brain.
You absolutely cringe on the stuff you did, but somehow it still got you down this right path, and like it's actually worked out pretty well for you.
It's worked out great. I had a wonderful time in law school itself. My advice to people, though, like the people who love law school tend not to like being lawyers, and vice versa. And so I feel like it is true that a lot of people go to law school like me, thinking they don't want to be a lawyer. And that's probably a big mistake, because you know what you do with a law degree? You be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so, you know, lawyers have an incredibly high rate of like suicide, drug abuse, mental health issues. And I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that a lot of folks didn't know what they were signing up for. Yeah. And then they're stuck with the debt and the golden handcuffs.
Yeah,
like even if you got to go to law school for free, when someone starts making $250,000 straight out of law school, and they get the nice car and the nice house and the great clothes, and you're suddenly like, well, you hate your job, but do you want to take a pay cut and make $100,000? Yeah. For a lot of people, that's impossible to do, and so they get stuck in jobs they don't love. And by the way, they're paying you that much money for your life, your time, all of it.
For sure. You're not going to work 40-hour weeks.
No.
So let's dispel some of the like how people understand what being a lawyer is like, because congratulations, you went to law school and became a lawyer. This is DC, like everyone goes to law school and doesn't become a lawyer. So for those who are on like the cusp of like, do I go to law school and actually practice? Like, what is being a lawyer actually like?
I mean, there's a few different paths. Let's talk about the sort of DC path, which is you went to a top law school, you're going to go to what we would call like an AmLaw 100 firm, meaning a top law firm that pays those top rates. What you're going to do at that law firm, and this is in the pre-AI world, by the way, is going to be to sit in a room alone most of the time and read a bunch of stuff.
For sure.
You're not even to the writing part of your job for several years potentially, and you're definitely not into the interacting with other humans in a trial or, I mean, God forbid, like an appellate argument for a few years. So I think that stuns a lot of people. And what you're reading isn't, you know, Mr. Smith goes to Washington to kill a mockingbird level inspirational stuff. It's usually one company suing another company.
That's got to be so boring.
For a lot of people, it is. Yeah. Now, for some people, they absolutely love the puzzle of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And those are really happy lawyers. So there are happy lawyers out there. And like, can you imagine finding a job that pays that much money that you love and think is really interesting and cool? Like, those are the people who should be going to law school.
Absolutely. And that's another place where Hollywood imprinted this idea in my mind that I would get to go to trial all the time and like fight with words. And then I shadowed a lawyer before my senior year of college because I was like, okay, I'm going to take the LSAT. I don't know what to do, so I'll go to law school, which again, terrible idea. But then he told me, he's like, yeah, max 5% of your time will be in the trial room. And I'm like, oh no, I can't. Like, I suck at school. I'm not going to be able to go read all the time and synthesize all this. So luckily I got pointed out of that direction. But glad
that being
you
said,
made it
look,
work.
There are things that people can do that I think are more likely to lead to happy lawyers. Being a federal prosecutor is something that almost everyone will say is the best job in law. Now, those are hard jobs to get,
sure.
And you're going to take the pay cut. Make sure not to get stuck in the golden handcuffs. So when those opportunities come up, you can take them. You know, finding a niche like bankruptcy law, for instance. I know it sounds boring, but weirdly, bankruptcy law is one of those areas where you're going to get into the courtroom probably faster than any other part of the law. So be open to, you know, not the Law and Order big corporate fights. You know, be curious, keep an open mind, find the lawyers who look happy.
Yeah, and my
not
mind
rich.
was like, how can I make the most amount of money, right? So you're looking at the types of law, like medical malpractice, which actually I find quite fascinating. Not at the time, but like that would have been kind of fun. But I was always thinking like, how can I make as much money as possible? And also just like not a good way to find a fulfilling life, especially if you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in school.
It's a version of what my mother said. If you marry for money, you pay for it every day.
Fair enough. That's good advice. That's wise. All right. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at the Dispatch now. First off, what is the Dispatch? Fill us in there.
Yeah, so the Dispatch is sort of one of those startup new media companies. Definitely leans conservative, but kind of think like Weekly Standard, National Review conservative. Gotcha. Started by Jonah Goldberg and Steve Hayes. And yeah, the morning newsletter is my favorite thing that we put out, and it's different than other morning newsletters because you get your sort of quick hits at the top, but you always get a deep dive into something, and it's not a deep dive into probably whatever the news of the day that is sort of being like thrown at you is about. It's often foreign policy, or it's a like nuanced take on some story that you hadn't thought about that way. So that's sort of the fun of the morning newsletter. And then the Dispatch bought SCOTUSblog, which has been around for 20 years. It was one of those original blogs. SCOTUS, by the way, Supreme Court of the United States. And SCOTUSblog was looking for a new home. If you're a lawyer, you know what SCOTUSblog is because it sort of got a part for media side, like stories about the cases, but then it actually also has case pages where you can find all of the briefs, and they're color coded so you know which side filed which briefs if you know how the color coding works at the Supreme Court. And at the time that started, you couldn't get the briefs any other way. The Supreme Court website has now caught up a little bit, but it's still pretty hard to use.
Government innovating.
Yeah, exactly. 20 years later. So now that the Dispatch owns SCOTUSblog, I spend a lot of my time thinking on how we can make SCOTUSblog great again.
Very cool.
Both for non-lawyers who like to follow this stuff and for lawyers. But, you know, I'll just say for the non-lawyer side, as Congress does so much less legislating and the president does a lot more, there's a reason that the courts are becoming more and more important to these political fights. And I think the way that we used to cover Congress doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. You know, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee used to be a household name, not anymore. But at some point, the courts have really replaced that. It shouldn't be the way that it works, but it is descriptive of the way it is now. And so I think we will move a lot of that coverage over to the court side. So the sooner you understand it and how that system is different than Congress, the more informed you'll be.
A lot of our audience are congressional staffers, or people who've worked on the Hill. Even though I worked so close to SCOTUS, I feel like I had
literally close.
Yeah, like, and I had no idea what was going on over there, right? Like, it's just such like a closed off institution. So can you help the average staffer kind of understand what is behind those doors?
Well, first of all, for the staffers hearing this, SCOTUSblog is very happy to come do, you know, briefings, or we can set up panels that would be interesting to you guys. Feel free to reach out. But, you know, my sort of top level Supreme Court take, you know, it is different than Congress, because while most people try to think of the court on that same right-left spectrum of conservative to liberal, like maybe they know it's not Republican and Democrat, but like it's still right to left. First of all, legal ideology doesn't really map on to political ideology. There's a few reasons for that. Okay, law, blah, blah, blah. But more than that, judges are a lagging indicator of our politics, right? They're appointed by a president, oftentimes at the lower courts, a senator. But that could have been 20 years ago. So if anything, there's sort of this, you know, light from another planet. We're seeing it now, but the light actually started a long time ago. So you almost have to look back at what the political parties thought at the time. So A, that right to left spectrum is more complicated than I think people understand compared to the politics today. Second, if it were as simple as right to left, every decision would be 6-3. But that's not true. In fact, last term, only 15% of the decisions were 6-3. And by the way, a third of those were actually 6-3 where Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch were the ones in dissent. As in, 9% of the cases had the three liberals in dissent. 6% of the cases had the three most conservative justices in dissent. Now, if you take the 5-4s and 6-3s together, about 15% of the cases had only liberals, had rather all the liberals on the losing side, but 15% of the cases had only conservatives on the losing side as well. So if you look at the last 20 years, 90% of the cases have had at least one liberal justice in the majority for every case. If it were just that x-axis of right to left, that makes no sense. As the court became more conservative, we should have seen them take more cases, overturn more precedent. There'd be more dividing along ideological lines. The exact opposite has happened. They're taking fewer cases than ever. They're overturning fewer precedents than at any time that we've studied this in the past, from the Warren Court to the Rehnquist Court to even the beginning of the Roberts Court. And as I said, it's really not 6-3. Those are the least likely outcomes for any given case. Okay, so what explains it then? I would argue there's this other axis, the y-axis, this vertical axis, and it's measuring something really different that we don't even talk about when it comes to Congress or the presidency. That's something more like an institutionalist axis, a consequentialist axis. These 9 people are an entire branch of government, and they have to think about their legitimacy differently because they're not politically accountable. They don't have an army. They don't have money. So when they say, for instance, in Brown versus Board of Education, desegregate the schools, who's going to do it? Not them. And in fact, in that case, for 10 years, the schools didn't desegregate until the political side caught up with and saw the wisdom in Brown v. Board of Education. And so the court always has to balance between what happens if our decision is ignored by the political branches to, well, if we just do whatever the political branches want, we serve no purpose, because at the end of the day, the court needs to be a counter-majoritarian institution, or else they wouldn't serve much point at all.
That's super fascinating. I really like the analogy of like light from another planet, because you do, it's just, I don't even know how to wrap my head around that because I'm young, I guess, but like to understand like all these different philosophies behind it, I'm sure because they were like developed in a different time that they're almost maybe more entrenched in their beliefs as well, or.
That's interesting. I mean, my probable take on that is that we all kind of probably stay with most of our beliefs most of the time, but they're formed at a relatively early age. And so take that year more than other things, because in politics in Congress, you do see people evolve their politics based on who the president is, where the party went, et cetera. But in the courts, you really don't see that. Justice Thomas, in 1991 looks really similar to Justice Thomas now.
It's interesting. Yeah, I would love to see if you took out like the incentivization aspect of like political office, how people's opinions would change over time, or maybe not.
And you know this from the Hill, oftentimes some people evolve, but actually that's very few people. What we see more often is that they retire or they lose a primary. And so that is the way that Congress sort of moves forward. Again, all things that don't happen in the courts, they have life tenure. And so the fact that Congress legislates less and less, I would say, is because the people who wanted to be legislators left over time, and they were replaced by the Instagram influencers.
Yeah, for sure. Can you help me understand what a office inside the Supreme Court looks like for a justice?
Yeah, so we call them chambers.
Okay.
The Chief Justice has set chambers. They will always be the Chief Justice's chambers. He has the couch that supposedly John Quincy Adams died on.
Oh, yeah?
Each of his law clerks get their own office. They are the only chambers to do that. For the rest of the justices, it can be a little like musical chairs. When a justice retires, the most senior justice can decide whether they want to change offices or stay, and then it goes down the line.
Yeah, fair enough.
So they move chambers pretty often. It looks like the Hill a lot in that way. The main things that they look for in moving chambers are the view. Some views have the pretty view of the Capitol, others do not. 2, the fireplace. Some have working fireplaces. That's pretty awesome. And 3, the history. Like, who are the justices? What's the lineage of this office? That's always really fun. The chambers themselves are totally decorated by the justices. So Justice Jackson, pretty modern, beautiful artwork there from famous African-American artists. Justice Alito's chambers, oddly, are like pink walls with green drapes, and he has a lot of Phillies gear, lots of things, presents from his clerks. So, I mean, they don't look that different than senators' offices in that sense, but the clerks for those other chambers share usually to a office. Those are really unglamorous. There's like a mini fridge if you're lucky. And for 5 of the justices, I think I'm right about that number, one of those offices is on a different floor from the justice. And so you'll see the clerks kind of arm wrestle over, the justice thinks it's who gets to be the closest to the justice, but in fact, it's who can be furthest from the justice.
Fair enough. How many staff are with each justice?
Each justice has 4 clerks that serve for 1 year. A retired justice gets 1 clerk that serves for that year and is shared with an active justice. So, for instance, Justice Kennedy and Justice Breyer both get 1 clerk, and I think Justice Kennedy's is shared with Justice Kavanaugh this year, for instance.
Okay. Wow, that's fascinating. I could keep going on that side of things, but I also want to know who you are outside of work, right? So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am originally from Texas.
Cool.
I grew up outside of Houston. My mother was a wildlife rehabilitator, state and federally licensed. So a bunch of my childhood was spent with injured or orphaned deer, doves, owls, hawks, a lot of possums. I had a pet possum named Owen, a box turtle named Barkley.
Okay, very cool.
So that was sort of more my childhood. I've always sort of explained that I'm like a cowboy boots and tofu kind of girl. Little bit contradictory. I never quite fit comfortably in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party for that matter. And, been basically between DC and Texas my whole life. Now have 2 boys, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old is an insane person, and the 5-year-old is the most mature adult I've ever met.
Love that. So is it chaos having 2 boys? Like everyone says, I mean, when I experience boys, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wanted a boy, but I see this and I'm like, holy crap, this is crazy.
That Nate Bargatze sketch is so true, where the neighbor asks him to like swap babysitting, and he has daughters and the neighbor has boys. And he's like, I handed you a princess. She sits quietly and colors for an hour, and you brought a bobcat into my house. I will say, though, the boys are just constant energy. There's sword fighting. They will make guns out of anything, literally, like a stick, a piece of paper, he made a gun out of like some lint that he found.
There you go. Great imagination right there.
But I do have a white couch.
Oh, jeez.
And I still have a white couch. Now, I got it before kids. I just assumed that it would be way gone by this point. But I'm telling you, this 5-year-old, he is so like obsessed with being like clean. He's like a walking marshmallow test. Just everything is, current deprivation for future reward.
There you go. Yeah, boys are so interesting. I feel like they'll figure out how to throw anything too, as soon as it's in your hand, toss.
I've had 3 broken toes. I actually thought that I broke my nose last week, but no, not actually broken, or at least not broken enough. But there was blood just like going everywhere. So boy life is real. It is serious. Like, it's not for the faint-hearted.
So we also learned that you did a little bit of birding. I'm assuming that came from the wildlife background, but tell us more about that.
Totally. My parents did not believe in like Disney cruises, so all of our vacations were wildlife oriented.
Vibes. Love
I've
that.
spent a month living in the Ngorongoro crater when they still allowed people to camp down there. That's in Tanzania. Cool. I have gone 7 miles down the Tambopika River in Peru to look at macaw sanctuary. That's like all very cool to talk about as an adult, but as a teenager, you're kind of like, I long for a normal spring break with my friends. Yep. But yes, I am a pretty avid birder. I mean, this is clearly rubbed off on my son a little bit, but I can do owl calls.
Okay.
And so I have taught the 5-year-old to do screech owl calls in particular.
Very cool. What's your favorite type of bird?
That's really hard. There's so many cool birds on different metrics. I mean, I guess if I really had to pick one, it'd probably be the raven.
Okay. Why?
They're super smart. They're really creative. The crows and ravens are different, but they're related. They're all corvids. The crows in my backyard, there was like a gang, and like I knew who the leader of it was, and they would get mad at me or like me depending on the food that was out there. They recognize you. You can have a real relationship, I feel like, with crows, and yet they're so common. They're like part of our lives every day. I mean, there's obviously more exotic birds that are neat in their own way, but how can you not marvel at a bird that you can watch every day in your backyard? Yeah,
and until I understood like the research behind what we know about crows and how smart they were, I'm like, oh, crows are gross, right? Like, but then you realize how like fascinating of a bird they are. And we have a ton in our backyard, but we also have hawks. And so watching those two go back and forth is insane. We were like, what is going on the first time we saw it? Many
of the hawks that we would get when I was a child had been injured by crows, by crow attacks. I keep a blanket in a box in the back of my car just in case there's a bird in need.
That's so nice of you.
I did end up showing up to a 1-year-old's birthday party with a full-on red-shouldered hawk. And I was like, hey, we can't stay long. As it turns out, I've got to go take care of this hawk.
You want to see something cool?
Yeah, exactly. So, invite me to your cocktail parties at your own risk.
Yeah, for sure. You'll have some fascinating stories. So before we go, last question. What is your ideal version of like American politics? Like, where does it go from here? What would you like to see?
Okay. This is a nerdy answer, but I have one.
Okay.
Which is the elevation of the structural constitution.
Okay.
So if you go back to the founding, or what you learned in school, we have 3 branches of government, and they all have distinct jobs, and each of those jobs provides a check on the other job. I know this is all the really simple stuff, but that in no way describes our government today. Yeah. Congress is supposed to do the legislating, all of it, but instead we have really the executive branch doing a lot of the legislating and the execution of those laws. Yeah. And I think that the courts have an important role to play to kind of get the kids on each side of the car and have them quit touching each other and breathing on each other. We have to go back to a time where Congress is the one who can solve our political disputes, and only Congress, through compromise and log rolling and all that messy political stuff. And the president's sole job is to execute those specific laws, not to fill them in, not to make all of these, regulations It's just a total misunderstanding of the system. And what you end up with is an unaccountable system. And when the system isn't accountable and it's not responsive, and you have this pendulum that swings back and forth every 4 years, because if you do government by executive order, the next president undoes it all.
Yeah.
No matter what issue you care about, climate change or immigration or anything else, you will not solve a problem 4 years at a time. And so I think that everyone will actually be happier. I think it will lower the temperature. And it's really what self-government was supposed to be about: political accountability and knowing who you go to when you want something changed. And the answer to that has to be Congress. So I want Congress to stand up for themselves. I want the president to have less power. I mean, my God, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on right now, don't we all agree the presidency has way too much power at this point?
It's chaos.
It's chaos. And I think once those two branches are put into their lanes with both, a lot of power, but only that power, I think the courts can go back to doing their job, which is more calling balls and strikes and less being the referee for our partisan disputes.
Yeah. Very cool. What's your future? What do you want to do next?
That's a great question. I have no idea what I'll be when I grow up. This is fun for now. I mean, the book coming out is pretty new for me. This will be my first book.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I don't know. I have another book idea in my head that's very different, very, lawyer meets Netflix, exciting story to tell.
A little Shonda Rhimes action or something.
So we'll see if that comes about.
There you go. Love to see it. Maybe we'll do a little book launch event on the Hill or something, and we can have this discussion in person later.
That'd be fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Capital Spotlight Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe to our channels to stay updated on new releases, share the show with your friends, and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more from Connect, subscribe to our daily newsletters, follow us on social media, and check out our website, all at Capital Connect, capital with an O, CNCT. See you next time.